Alright guys, today we are looking at the stages of sleep, in particular NREM sleep. So, what are these states of sleep? In a typical night, we actually experience two distinct states of sleep, and these are called non-rapid eye movement sleep, or NREM sleep, and rapid eye movement sleep. So today we're going to be looking at the first one, non-rapid eye movement sleep. And just a quick note, a reminder, when you are filling in SACs and exams, you should always write the full term, non-rapid eye movement sleep, and then you can put in brackets like I have here, NREM, and you can use NREM from there on. So both are classed as sleep, as we looked at the definition of sleep last lesson, because they have reversibility, perceptual disengagement, and unresponsiveness. But otherwise they are quite different. So what is this idea of a sleep cycle? Basically what happens is NREM and REM sleep periods will alternate throughout the night, and that alternation between those is called a sleep cycle. And each sleep cycle has a period of NREM sleep and REM sleep, although not always all four stages of the NREM sleep, and we'll look at that in more detail soon. So a normal young adult will experience about 5 to 6 of these sleep cycles a night, and the length of them can vary, but they do typically last approximately 90 minutes. So the first sleep cycle can be between 70 and 100 minutes, the second 90 to 120, so it's a lot longer, but on average they're about 90 minutes each. And we can represent the cyclical nature using something called a hypnogram. So this here is a hypnogram, and it basically just shows each stage of sleep and where we are over the time that we've been asleep. So here you can see over that 8 hours, you will typically have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cycles of sleep. And we start from being awake, going into a deeper sleep, back up to being awake. So this is our most awake stage, and this is our deepest sleep stage. And you'll notice REM sleep up here is actually sitting just below awake. It is quite an active stage of sleep, which is a misconception. Often people think it's the deepest, but in actual fact, NREM stage 4 is our deepest stage of sleep. So this really goes from most aware to least aware. All right, NREM sleep. This is about 75 to 80% of our sleep, and you would have seen that in the hypnogram we just saw, and we'll look at that again. So the first half of the night, we definitely have a lot more NREM sleep than the second half, and it's characterized by a reduction in physiological activity. So while the brain is active in NREM sleep, it is not as active as it is in REM sleep. So as I said before, awareness is a lot higher in REM sleep than in NREM sleep. But in NREM sleep, we have a reduction in physiological activity. So our movement, our heart rate, our breathing is dropping. And you can see here, there are actually 4 stages of NREM sleep. Stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. And in this image, you'll see often stage 3 and 4 are combined, and sometimes they're just referred to as stage 3 or deep sleep. And as we go through, each stage is progressively a deeper sleep. And each stage will have distinguishable physiological characteristics, so changes in brainwave patterns, reduction in heart rate, breathing, and blood pressure. So as I said, often you'll see the stage 3 representing both stage 3 and 4 sleep. So stage 1 is going to be that period between wakefulness and sleep. Stage 2 is our body temperature dropping, brain begins to produce something called sleep spindles. And then by the time we're in stage 3 and 4 sleep, we are completely relaxed and we're in a deep sleep. And we'll look at REM in more detail next lesson. So let's go back to this hypnogram. Important things you need to know about it. There is a transition stage between being awake and being asleep, and we call this sleep onset. The length of time it takes to transition into sleep onset we call sleep latency. Latency refers to time. And that sleep onset can last about 1 or 2 minutes and normally is followed by stage 1 sleep. If you have a sleep disorder, however, it may persist all the way into REM sleep. And as I've mentioned, not all stages of NREM sleep occur in each cycle. And there are also things called brief awakenings that will occur in later sleep stages. So you're kind of almost awake. You might remember sort of, oh, I woke up for a second and then went back to sleep. So let's look at this hypnogram in more detail. As we said, this is our most aware stage. REM sleep is actually a much more active brain activity. So this is the next level of awareness. And as we go down, we become less and less aware internally and externally. As sleep starts, we have this sleep onset. So it's this period between being awake and falling asleep and going into stage 1. Your first cycle will have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4 sleep. And then you cycle back before you go into REM sleep. So you go back to stage 3, stage 2. You don't go back into stage 1 here though, you go straight into REM. And then as we gradually fall into a deep sleep again, stage 1, 2, 3, you'll see 3 starts to lengthen, 4 starts to drop in length. And we can get this going back up to stage 2, drop back down to stage 3, back up to 2, and again we skip 1. And so every time we get to this level above stage 1, we call it a sleep cycle. So sleep cycle starts from being awake into deep sleep until we hit a brain activity of REM sleep and the next stage of stage 1 sleep. So each cycle is a new stage 1 sleep dropping down into a deeper sleep. So you'll start to see here, you get less deep sleep. So you may not even get a stage 4 sleep. You can, but that depth of sleep starts to drop off as we get to our 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th cycle. And so instead of sleeping as deeply, we do start to get these brief awakening periods. So this is our most important period of sleep, but this sleep is still important. All right, hypnagogic state. So sometimes we refer to a sleep onset as a hypnagogic state, and that's because we'll get these unusual hallucinatory type perceptual experiences. So we might get visual hallucinations such as flashes of color and light. You may get dreamlike images that resemble photos. You might get a feeling of floating or weightlessness. You may hear things that haven't actually occurred. And movement sensations. So I'm sure a few of you would have had this sense of falling or slipping. And there's a special name for that called a hypnagogic jerk. So if you've ever seen someone who's just fallen asleep and they suddenly go, jump, and they wake themselves up, and often they've got that sense of falling when it happens, that's called a hypnagogic jerk. And this hypnagogic state is associated with a distinguishable brainwave pattern. So we can see it happening in our brainwaves when we hook up our EEG. And it can occur when we transition from sleep to awake. So let's go through these stages. Stage 1 is drifting into and out of true sleep. It's a gradual loss of awareness, and it often will follow from NREM and REM sleep stages. We're getting lower body arousal, so heart rate, body temperature, respiration, muscle tension is all going down. You do get these muscle relaxation that cause involuntary muscle twitches, like that hypnagogic jerk I just mentioned. The brainwave starts slowing down, typically lasts about 5 minutes in a young, healthy adult, and you can easily be wakened. And we call that a low arousal threshold because there's not much that it takes to wake you up. And often you'll awake thinking you hadn't been asleep at all. Then you start to drift into stage 2. So we call this a period of light sleep, and some people identify it as the first point of being truly asleep. So again, body movements are lessening, breathing becomes more regular, blood pressure, temperature starts to drop, heart rate gets lower, and your eye movements stop at this point, hence non-rapid eye movement sleep. You get brief bursts of something called rapid brain movement or sleep spindles. So we mentioned those before, and they're just tiny bursts of brain activity, and they only last for a second or two. The entire stage will last for 10 to 25 minutes. It will lengthen in time successively with each cycle. So each cycle, stage 2 goes for longer. And so it actually accounts for 45 to 55% of your total sleep over the night. Now, it has a higher arousal threshold than stage 1, but you are still able to be easily aroused until about midway through. So it takes more to wake you up than stage 1, but you're still pretty easily awoken. And when you are awoken, about 7 out of 10 people report not being asleep. They'll say they were dozing or thinking when they are aroused. Stage 3. This is the beginning of our deep sleep. It's described as a moderately deep sleep. It may not occur in the latter half of a sleep episode. So you might have seen those sleep cycles we were looking at in the hypnogram, and sometimes you don't get a stage 3 sleep at all in those latter cycles. So heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature, still dropping. Breathing rate will continue to be slow and steady. So it's not really dropping at this point, but it is just slow and steady. And again, no eye movement. Our brain waves slow down further. We get this thing called delta waves. Delta waves is often what we call slow wave sleep, and they become more and more prominent. So they're accounting for about 20 to 50% of the brainwave pattern we're seeing on an EEG. Can last from a few minutes up to 10 minutes, and it's about 3 to 8% of our total sleep episode. In terms of arousal, you're extremely relaxed. You're in a deep sleep, so you're less and less responsive to external stimuli. Your arousal threshold is going to be higher than stage 2, so it's harder to arouse you. And if you are aroused, you tend to be groggy and quite disorientated if you're woken. Our last stage is stage 4. This is our deepest stage of sleep and can often be called very deep sleep. So very similar to stage 3. A little typo there, I'll fix that. But muscles completely are relaxed. You barely move at all. And you've got no eye movement. Your heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature are all at their lowest and most regular. Again, these delta waves are dominating your EEG pattern. So now they're more than 50%, and they can even be slower and larger than those in stage 3. So our first sleep cycle, you've got about 20 to 40 minutes in stage 4, as we saw in our hypnogram. And as the night progresses, you get less and less time in stage 4. And like stage 3, and like we saw in our hypnogram, you may not get stage 4 sleep at all. It's about 10 to 15% of our total sleep episode. And this is our highest arousal threshold. In other words, this is the hardest point it is to wake you. And if you are woken, we often get really groggy. It takes several minutes to orientate yourself, and you'll have a really poor memory of the sleep event. And this grogginess, taking time to orient yourself, having this poor memory, we call sleep inertia. And sleep inertia is kind of another word that you might commonly refer to as sleep drunkenness. But our technical term for it is sleep inertia. All done.